Good evening. Welcome to the National News Broadcast. I'm Kasani Balachandra.
And I'm Thilina Udayaratna. For starters, we take a look at tonight's top stories.
200 face masks to the USA from Sri Lanka. Remanded former Minister Rajitha Senaratne director to quarantine. The CID interrogates former Minister Mangala Samaravira. The President requests the banking sector to assist the economic revival in the country in the maximum capacity. The President donates his 3-month salary to the COVID-19 fund. Schools will recommence after health authorities ensure that the entire country is safe, the government says. The World Health Organization says that COVID-19 will not be completely eradicated from the world.
Moving on to those and other stories in detail. Empowering the export industry in the country, 200 million locally produced face masks were exported to the United States today. The consignment of the face masks was officially handed over to the U.S. Ambassador to Sri Lanka and Maldives, Elena B. Teplitz. The face masks have been produced by Brandix Apparel Limited. Head of the Presidential Task Force on Economic Revival and Poverty Eradication, Basil Rajapaksa, attended the event as the special representative of the President. The face masks produced by Brandix have been manufactured with the efforts of over 15,000 of the company's associates. The face mask, produced as 3-ply and of cotton-based fabric with antimicrobial finish, is stretchable for better fit. The face masks have been manufactured in accordance to strict hygienic standards. Chairman of Joint Apparel Association Forum of Sri Lanka, A. Sukumaram, and Chief Executive Officer of Brandix Group of Companies, Ashraf Omar, were present at this occasion.
Something that changes your life story. Litro Gas.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa requests the banking sector to contribute towards the economic revival in the country away from traditional thinking and its framework. The President made these remarks during a meeting held at the Presidential Secretariat today, enjoining the banking sector for the program composed for the economic growth and development in the post-coronavirus era and the issues which may occur to the banking sector during this process. The President said that the spread of the coronavirus has been controlled by the government. The biggest challenge posed before them is the rebuilding of the economy. Citing that the apparel industry would take a long time to return to normalcy, the President said that the tourism industry has also faced a severe drawback. The nation should divert its attention towards a production-based economy. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa said that the banking sector can make an active contribution in this regard, stating that all administrative fields, including the health sector, committed to successfully controlling the coronavirus pandemic. The President said that he expects a similar dedication and commitment from the banking sector. The plantation industry, small and medium-scale productions, housing and other constructions, and the export crop cultivation industry are several fields of interest which can contribute in strengthening the production-based economy in the country. The President requested the banking sector to extend loans under convenient conditions to commence business ventures in these industries. The majority of the loan facilities should be generated for newly introduced priorities. The President emphasized that the banking sector should also extend assistance for small-scale businesses and the farmer community as well as large-scale businesses. Pointing out the importance in constantly monitoring on how the loan assistances have been utilized for the businesses, the President said that those who have failed to repay the obtained loans are the rich and not the poor. He reminded that he made a pledge through his policy statement to distribute housing units for the middle-class entities on concessionary rates and emphasized on the importance in providing loan facilities on low interest rates for middle-class entities. The representatives of the banking sector who participated in the meeting extended their support for the program carried out by the government and on its economic revival. They agreed to discuss the issues pertaining to the banking sector with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Governor of the Central Bank, Professor W.D. Lakshman, Deputy Governors and the Chairman of State and Private Sector Banks and their Chief Executive Officers took part in the meeting.
Former Minister Rajitha Senaratne, who was taken into remand custody, has been directed to the Pallansena Isolation Centre in Negombo. With the aim to prevent the spread of COVID-19 inside the prisons, all suspects who have been placed under remand custody will be directed to the Pallansena Isolation Centre in Negombo for a quarantine period. Accordingly, Commissioner General of Prisons Jaisiri Tennekon said that the former minister has also been directed to the Pallansena Isolation Centre. The former minister is expected to be directed to the medical examination conducted within the quarantine process. Former Minister Rajitha Senaratne was arrested by the CID last evening. He was arrested in accordance to a court order issued by Colombo Fort Chief Magistrate Lanka Jayaratne yesterday over the media conference held on the controversial white van incidents. The former minister was remanded till May 27th after he was produced to the courts upon his arrest. Many civil societies lodged complaints with the Criminal Investigation Department alleging that the reputation of the presidential candidate President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was tarnished due to the statements made by these persons during the media briefing. After a lengthy hearing, Colombo High Court Judge Manjula Tilakaratne revoked the order issued to release the former minister on bail. Accordingly, the former minister was arrested by the CID. Meanwhile, the Mahajana Yuthukama Centre has issued an announcement claiming that necessary steps should be taken after conducting an inquiry on the conduct of Dr. M.R. Mubarak, who was responsible for the medical treatment of the former minister.
Former parliamentarian Mangala Samaravira was summoned to the Criminal Investigation Department today. He was summoned to the CID to record a statement. He was summoned to the CID to record a statement over an investigation carried out on using buses belonging to the Sri Lanka Transport Board to transport displaced persons to cast their votes during the 2019 presidential election. Reports indicated that he was inquired on extending financial facilities to transport the displaced persons. After recording a statement for 5 hours, the former parliamentarian left the CID premises at 7:30 p.m.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has donated the equivalent of 3 months of his salary worth 292,500 rupees to the COVID-19 Healthcare and Social Security Fund. The relevant cheque was handed over to the Secretary to the President, Dr. P.B. Jayasundara, today at the Presidential Secretariat. The government took measures to extend a historic welcome to 3 new foreign envoys appointed to Sri Lanka amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Ambassador for the Federative Republic of Brazil, Ambassador for the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the High Commission of the Republic of India, based in Colombo, presented their credentials to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa at the Presidential Secretariat in Colombo today via a video conferencing ceremony. This is the first time in Sri Lanka where this solemn ceremony was conducted using internet technology. Instead of postponing the presentation ceremony until the COVID-19 crisis ends, President instructed for the ceremony to proceed as per schedule. This is one of the main innovative ways adopted by Sri Lanka in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result, Sri Lanka, while successfully containing the virus, had continued to make progressive steps socially and economically and now diplomatically. In the relatively short ceremony, the diplomats presented their credentials to the President by displaying it to the camera. Afterwards, the President welcomed them. The envoys who presented their credentials today were Ambassador-designate of the Federative Republic of Brazil in Colombo, Sergio Luis Caniz, Ambassador-designate of the Islamic Republic of Iran in Colombo, Hashim Ashjazadeh, High Commissioner-designate of the Republic of India in Colombo, Gopal Bagle. Minister of Foreign Relations Dinesh Gunawardena, Secretary to the President P.B. Jayasundara, and Secretary to the Ministry of Foreign Relations Ravinath Arya Singha also participated at the ceremony.
President of China Xi Jinping has praised that Sri Lanka has effectively contained the spread of the pandemic in the country under the leadership of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The Chinese president has confirmed that the Chinese government will continue to work together with Sri Lanka in the future as well. According to a report on Reuters, Chinese President Xi Jinping suggested that China and Sri Lanka, while ensuring COVID-19 prevention and control protocol, gradually resume practical cooperation in various fields, advance major cooperation projects in an orderly manner, and promote the high-quality construction of the Belt and Road. Chinese President Xi Jinping made the remarks in a telephone conversation with Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, while adding that such efforts will provide impetus for Sri Lanka's economic recovery. The Chinese president recalled that various sections of Sri Lankan society offered China active support at a critical moment in China's fight against the coronavirus disease, with many moves particularly heartwarming and touching. He thanked the Sri Lankan government and people for taking care of Chinese citizens in their country during the pandemic and said that the Chinese side will also continue to ensure the safety and health of Sri Lankan citizens on its soil. Noting that Sri Lanka and China enjoy a long-running friendship with cooperation in various fields, advancing efficiently, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa said China has over the years provided tremendous valuable support for and assistance for the country's economic and social development, for which the Sri Lankans are deeply grateful. The Sri Lankan president added that he appreciates the vision put forward by President Xi Jinping of building a community with a shared future for mankind and agrees on supporting the WHO in playing a leading role in global anti-pandemic cooperation. And in other news, steps have also been taken to impose an island-wide curfew on Sunday the 17th of May throughout the day. The curfew enforced in Colombo and Gampaha districts will continue to be in effect until further notice. The curfew in remaining districts will be in force from 8 p.m. till 5 a.m. until the 16th of May, in accordance to an announcement issued by the President's Media Division this evening. Accordingly, the curfew, which will be relaxed in other districts except in the districts of Colombo and Gampaha at 5 a.m. on the 18th of May, will be in effect from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. daily till Saturday the 23rd of May. The mechanism, which commenced on last Monday the 11th to recommence the civilian life and economic activities while curfew is in force, will continue till Saturday the 16th of May. This process will resume from Monday the 18th of May onwards. With the resumption of state and private sectors, civilian life in the country is gradually returning to normalcy. However, the public has been cautioned to carry out their daily affairs while adhering to health instructions. The health and security divisions continue to fulfill their responsibilities and services in this regard. The transport authorities have directed their attention vastly on transportation services in the country enforced during the curfew times in districts of Colombo and Gampaha, as private buses have been deployed in the curfew-lifted areas thus far. 10 trains have been deployed to transport employees of the state and private sectors to reach Colombo for work purposes. 2,265 persons have registered to obtain the service rendered by the Railways Department. In the meantime, 2,700 persons were given the opportunity to return to work using railway services today. They were admitted into trains after checking their employee identity cards. The Railways Department has confirmed that 10 trains will be deployed tomorrow for the employees of the state and private sectors. Meanwhile, 11,500 persons have registered to obtain railway services from next Monday. Accordingly, a necessary number of trains will be deployed to provide transport facilities for the registered workers. The Sri Lanka Air Force disinfected 29 railway stations along the stretch from Ragama to Chilau today. The disinfectant process was carried out under the guidance of Sri Lanka Air Force Commander Air Marshal Sumangala Dias. The proceedings of the Colombo Manning Market was carried out in the usual manner today. The chairman of the Manning Market said that 90 lorries arrived at the premises for wholesale trading activities within the day. All outlets of Lanka Sathosa were opened throughout the day for the public to purchase essential commodities. The outlets in curfew-enforced areas will be open from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m., while the outlets in curfew-lifted areas will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Meanwhile, other shops and offices were open today for the convenience of the general public. Meanwhile, steps have been taken to recommence the halted construction projects due to the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. Accordingly, steps have been taken to reinitiate all development projects which were suspended for a period of 3 months. The medical health officers and public health inspectors are expected to monitor whether the development activities will be carried out under appropriate health protective methodologies. A total of 445 COVID-19 patients have recovered thus far. 63 COVID-19 patients have recovered from the disease and have been discharged from hospitals in the past 24 hours. 461 patients continue to receive treatment in hospitals. Obtaining biosamples from people in various parts of Colombo Municipal Council's area for PCR tests to identify COVID-19 patients were carried out today. Meanwhile, bio and blood samples were obtained randomly in the Totalanga housing complex in Colombo for PCR tests today. According to the report issued by the epidemiology unit at 10 a.m. today, 44 out of the 63 patients recovered from the disease were treated at the Sri Lanka Navy Hospital. 5 recovered patients were treated at the Valikanda Base Hospital, while another 5 patients were treated at the Homagama Base Hospital. Another 4 recovered patients were treated at the IDH in Angoda, while 3 patients were treated at Colombo East Base Hospital. Another 2 patients were recovered from the disease while receiving treatment at the Valikanda Base Hospital. Director General of Health Services Dr. Anil Jasinga said that the 26 persons detected as COVID-19 patients yesterday are members of the Sri Lanka Navy. Director General of Health Services Dr. Anil Jasinga said that the health authorities are closely monitoring the Navy officers and their relatives of being infected with the disease. He said that the public should not be unnecessarily afraid over the spreading of the disease in everywhere else. He said that the country has not been completely opened and pointed out that the necessity in opening the airport in the future. He said that with the undertaken measures, the infection has a low probability in entering into the country through such means. He requested the public to adhere to the health guidelines and maintain social distancing in the future as well.
සමාජ ක්‍රියාකාරකම් සඳහා කෙසේ ඉඩකඩ ලැබේද කියන පිළිබඳව විමසීම් ලැබෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම විවාහ මංගල උත්සව කෙසේ පැවැත්විය යුතුද කියන එක මේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් මට කිව හැක්කේ අප විසින් මාර්ගෝපදේශ විශාල සංඛ්‍යාවක් සපයලා තියෙනවා. මේ විවාහ මංගල්‍ය උත්සව වැනි අවස්ථා සඳහා තවත් විශාල අවස්ථා සංඛ්‍යාවක් සඳහා මාර්ගෝපදේශ හෙට අනිද්දා මේ දින දෙක තුල නිකුත් වීමට නියමිතයි. ඒ අනුව ඒ ආශ්‍රිතව කටයුතු කිරීමේ හැකියාව ලැබෙනවා.
A total of 121 infected Sri Lanka Navy officers have recovered from the disease. Meanwhile, 59 Sri Lanka Navy members were discharged from the hospitals after recovering from the infection. They will undergo the quarantine process for another 14 days.
Taking a look at some stories from overseas, hundreds of residents in the Chinese city of Wuhan have been queuing at hospitals to be tested as a flurry of new infections threatens a second lockdown. The city where the global health crisis began is embarking on a campaign to test all of its 11 million residents to avoid another mass spread.
The prospect of a return to lockdown in Wuhan has prompted authorities in the Chinese city where the global health crisis emerged to launch an ambitious campaign on Wednesday to test all of its 11 million residents. That decision comes after a cluster of new cases raised fears of a second wave of infections. A door-to-door campaign and online questionnaires have been rolled out throughout the community to seek information about tests people have already had and if they belong to high-risk groups. Chinese state TV showed footage of hundreds of residents queuing up for pre-screening and testing at one university hospital on Wednesday. Wuhan was placed under a lockdown at the end of January, which was only relaxed on April the 8th. It reported 6 new cases over the weekend, the first infections since restrictions were removed. The Wuhan government earlier said that it had 211 locations where tests can be carried out and 53 laboratories to process results.
Well, Japan is expected to lift the state of emergency for 39 of its 47 prefectures today, while the capital Tokyo is set to keep restrictions in place until the city observes a convincing containment of the coronavirus.
Japan is expected to lift the state of emergency for most of the country on Thursday. However, the capital, Tokyo, is set to keep restrictions in place until it sees a convincing containment of the coronavirus. That's according to local media. Just a month ago, the world's third largest economy declared a state of emergency, urging citizens to reduce person-to-person contact, hoping to slow the pace of new cases. Schools and businesses have been closed, but some non-essential businesses, even in hard-hit areas, have gradually started to reopen. While Japan has avoided the kind of explosive growth seen in the United States and elsewhere, its testing has also been among the lowest. And with hospitals still stretched in the capital, Tokyo, it and surrounding prefectures are set to remain on alert, as well as second biggest city, Osaka. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is set to speak at 6 p.m. local time and is expected to explain what needs to happen for the state of emergency to end.
Now, several neighborhood bookstores in France are facing a fight for survival after the 8-week lockdown that has weighed heavily on profit margins.
France's neighborhood bookstores survived television and later the advent of online shopping and e-readers. But then came an 8-week lockdown that's weighed heavily on profit margins and threatens the survival of some shops. France's bookstores were allowed to reopen on Monday for the first time since March 17th. Here at the Issy store in Paris' 2nd arrondissement, wearing a mask is compulsory and hand sanitizer flows freely, allowing customers to browse the literary delights as long as they use it. The store's co-founder is Anne-Laure Vial.
Now the difficulty is if we don't get enough business to cover our costs, and this is possible. So if the recovery is slow in the long run, we must hold on for several months. It's important to say this. Covering our costs is not a given.
The store's 12 employees are back on the payroll after being temporarily furloughed, and the business has applied for 2 loans to help cover overheads. Independent bookshops are a ubiquitous feature of Parisian neighbourhoods, and the government has said it wants to avoid any bookstores going bankrupt. So what are the city's bookworms stocking up on? Well, there is, of course, Albert Camus' La Peste, about a plague that sweeps a city, or the cartoon strips in Pascal Brutal, about a gym addict from Brittany, come highly recommended for some much-needed comic relief.
And in other news, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka announced stimulus measures to mitigate the adverse impact on the licensed commercial banks due to the outbreak of COVID-19 and to strengthen the liquidity positions of banks. Through these extraordinary measures, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka expects the banks to provide uninterrupted credit flows in a prudent manner to revive the economic activities, where in turn all sectors, including the financial sector of the economy, will in fact benefit. In a media release yesterday, the central bank said that the decision by the Monetary Board was reached in the wake of the possible adverse impact on liquidity and other key performance indicators of licensed banks due to the implementation of the credit support scheme to assist COVID-19 hit businesses and individuals and the need to meet other urgent liquidity needs of banks. Accordingly, the Monetary Board has taken measures to provide additional funding under the refinance facility or other credit operations, enabling the banking sector to provide working capital and other loans at concessionary rates of interest to spur demand in the economy. The Monetary Board has also enabled licensed banks to avail liquidity through the Sri Lanka Deposit Insurance and Liquidity Support Scheme or as loans and advances in rupees under the framework of emergency loans and advances to licensed banks based on an acceptable collateral and liquidity forecasts. Also, the Monetary Board has decided up to the 30th of June 2021 to permit licensed banks to consider certain assets as liquid assets in the computation of the statutory liquid assets ratio and the reduction minimum requirement of the liquidity coverage ratio and net stable funding ratio to 90% with enhanced supervision and frequent reporting. Concurrently, the Monetary Board has decided to restrict certain discretionary payments of licensed banks for a limited period of time until the 31st of December 2020. Licensed banks are required to exercise prudence and refrain to the possible extent when incurring non-essential and capital expenditure during this period.
Now, the Minister of Education, Dala Salahapirma, says that the schools will be reopened after the health authorities ensure that the country is safe from the COVID-19 pandemic. The minister said that following the instructions directed by health authorities, each school will receive necessary equipment to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Minister Dala Salahapirma made these remarks while taking part in a special meeting of the Directors of Education of Zones and Divisions of Western Province today. The meeting was held at the Ministry of Education premises. The educational directors were informed on the mechanisms in place to recommence schools after controlling the epidemic situation in the country. The suggestions and opinions of the educational directors in this regard were also obtained during the meeting. The minister also informed the educational directors on the changes expected to be introduced to the education system in future. Minister Dala Salahapirma said that the schools should be reopened when the prevailing situation in the country returned to a better condition. He said that the schools will be reopened after the health authorities assure that the students will be safe from the COVID-19 pandemic. He said that all necessary health precautionary measures should be undertaken for the safety of children. He said that relevant equipment ranging from establishing hand washing basins to heat measuring devices should be given to schools. He said that as the responsibility of the government, the President as well as the Prime Minister have decided to take all necessary measures to protect the children in the country. The Minister said that a financial provision of more than 1 billion will be allocated to purchase necessary equipment. Secretary to the Ministry of Education M.A.N. Chitrananda and State Secretary to the Ministry of Education Ranjit Chandrasekhara were present at this occasion.
The Cabinet of Ministers has granted approval to provide relief for the public affected by the spread of COVID-19 for the month of May. Accordingly, the affected public will receive an allowance worth 5,000 rupees, similar to the month of April. These remarks were made at the media briefing held to announce the Cabinet decisions today. Accordingly, a financial provision of 3,146 million rupees has been allocated for the senior citizens allowance for 629,214 beneficiaries. 489 senior citizens above the age of 100 is set to receive 2.4 million rupees. A financial provision of 619 million rupees has been allocated for 123,641 disabled persons. Also, a financial allocation of 221 million rupees has been reserved for 44,291 patients with kidney disease. 71,383 persons who had made appeals to the Prime Minister requesting to grant the allowance is expected to receive a sum of 356 million rupees. A provision of approximately 8,991 million rupees has been allocated for 1,798,293 Samurdhi beneficiaries. Another 731,975 enlisted persons for the Samurdhi benefit are also expected to receive 3,659 million rupees. Another allocation of 9,624 million rupees will be extended to 1,924,967 families who have been deprived of a livelihood.
The United Nations World Food Programme and the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade are providing 74 million rupees to the Ministry of Education towards the National School Meal Programme. Around 80,000 primary school children are expected to receive 1 month's worth of food rations to help them and their families cope with the school closure due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In a communique issued by the WFP Sri Lanka, it has indicated that the contribution is reflective of the long-standing partnership between WFP and the Government of Sri Lanka and WFP's continued support for the country's flagship national school meal programs since 2003. The WFP Sri Lanka has stated that the contribution will enable the Ministry of Education to commence the first phase of the take-home ration program, while further resources are mobilized by the ministry to expand the program. The packages comprise eggs, lentils and other dry commodities specified by the Ministry of Education to ensure diet diversity for children and their families. Distribution will start later this month to children at schools identified by the Education Ministry in the central, Uwa, northern and eastern provinces. After this initial phase, the take-home rations will subsequently be extended by the Ministry of Education to all schools covered by the National School Meal Programme.
Now, we've got more local news coming your way. 2 Sri Lanka trade unions in the country presented 4,000 protective gears worth 1 million rupees for the program to prevent the spread of COVID-19 today. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa received a cheque worth 1,065,000 rupees to be donated to the COVID-19 Healthcare and Social Fund. The consignment of protective gear was donated by the Association of Inland Revenue Assessing Officers, and the Prime Minister directed the consignment of protective gear to the IDH in Angoda. Meanwhile, a cheque worth 1,065,000 rupees was presented to the Prime Minister to be credited to the COVID-19 Healthcare and Social Security Fund by the members of the Sri Lanka Podujana Engineering Front, who are currently holding chairmanships and directorships in various institutions. In the meantime, Devin Fernando, a student at St. Sebastian's College, Moratuwa, has innovated a drone to supply medicine to the public to measure the heat of the people and to create awareness on the disease. The drone was presented to the Prime Minister today. Well, that's it on the Rupavahini News for tonight. Join us once again tomorrow. Until then, stay safe and take care. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Good night.